All right, I think we have enough folks to get us started. So let's go ahead and call this meeting to order at 5 p.m. It is March 23rd. Welcome everybody. My name is Sean Eystone, and currently we have directors Clausen, Eastham, Godwin, Malone, and Williams, and shortly we'll have Director Etsy. We have Superintendent Matt Degner and Recording Secretary Kim Colvin. So I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. Before we get started, I would like to take a minute to recognize the tragic loss of one of our students a couple of weeks ago. Dylan Sauge was a sophomore at West High, and our condolences go out to Dylan's family, as well as the West High community and the swim community in Iowa City. I know he was a big part of that as well. So please join me in a brief moment of silence for Dylan. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Our first item is our community comment section. So if you would like to make some comments, if you're an attendee on the meeting and would like to make some comments, you could use the raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen, and I will call on you, and Kim will give you the rights to speak, and you will have 4 minutes to speak. We have one hand up right now, Kim, and it is Caroline Barker.
Good evening. My name is Caroline Barker, and I'm currently a junior at West High School. I wanted to speak this evening to express my feelings about recent administrative decisions. I'm disappointed to see another white man, Mitch Gross, be put in a position of power as principal of West High. Diversifying staff, administration, and the whole hiring process is a part of the district's diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, which you, the board, say you are committed to. Hiring a white man who says he is committed to equity is not the same thing as hiring an administrator of color. It's not even close. An administrator of color would provide necessary representation for the student body and would be able to relate to and understand students of color in a way that a white administrator cannot. It matters who you choose to hire. Administrators affect students, parents, staff, and the overall culture of the district. I'm disappointed that you had this opportunity to make change in the district for the better and you chose not to. You did not only move a white man into power at West High, but also at Liberty High School with the decision to move interim principal Justin Colbert to principal. With these administrative decisions, there are now 4 white men at the top of our administration, with our white male superintendent and 3 white male high school principals. The district claims to be in favor of hiring diverse teachers, administrators, and staff as stated in the DEI, but you must show that as well. The DEI shouldn't be something you promote publicly and then hide behind while you make decisions that go directly against its goals. It's frustrating to see the district make statements of commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion without seeing real action. In the future, I hope you take student and community voices into account when making decisions like these, and I hope that you follow the DEI plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Appreciate it. Are there any other folks who would like to make comments? If so, they need to raise their hand. It looks like Reem Kurja is there. Kim?
Hello, everyone. My name is Reem Kurja, and I'm the one working on the NSC campaign, also known as the No School on Aid campaign. I would like to make my final statement before the voting, but prior to that, I wanted to say that I got kicked out of the meeting after talking last time I attended. It seemed like it was a technical issue, so I just want to make sure that it doesn't happen again, as I want to view the rest of the meeting. Anyways, I'm speaking today to express my support for an ICC SD calendar inclusion of Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. We see an increasing number of Muslim students in our district, and your support of this calendar demonstrates support and inclusion of the ICCSD's Muslim student population. Furthermore, including the 2 Eids in the ICCSD's calendar will open opportunities for the ICCSD to present instruction and recognition around Islam, which will be a strong step towards understanding and tolerance in our community. The ICCSD is a strong community full of diversity and inclusion, which is why I think that adding a break for Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha is essential to strengthening our community bond. We have gotten over 5,000 signatures on the petition so far, and I hope that is enough to persuade you that we need this. From many comments on the petition, here are a few. This was by Chelsea Green, and it states, as a parent in the ICCSD, I agree. All major holidays should be off, not just Christian. Give it off. It's time to be inclusive. From Mr. Josh Flaming, a teacher at Horn Elementary, no matter the opinions anyone in the community may have about this petition, one cannot argue against the merits and the arguments supporting it. I'm glad this is being put in the spotlight and happy to support it. From Tess de Grazia, yes, thank you for creating this. We need this in our school's community. People of their cultures should be able to celebrate freely, just like Christians on Christmas. Thank you. And finally, from Benjamin Hackler, this won't stand, and the stress of Muslims during their Eids that happens during the school year must be prevented, and everyone must feel comfortable with the religion they grew up with. So I say this, imagine waking up Christmas morning, running downstairs, opening presents, and then grabbing your backpack and heading to school. That would never happen, but for many Muslim students in the ICCSD, it's what is asked of them each year Eid falls during school. The ICCSD should change their calendar to give students the day off to celebrate Eid so that everyone is included and considered. I hope that during their Eid that falls during school this year, my Muslim community and I can celebrate without the stress of missing school. Thank you for your time, and I would like to take a minute to thank my teachers, Ms. Brexford, Ms. Ryan, Ms. Cannon for informing individuals about the petition, Ms. Hassan and Ms. Bruning for helping to spread the word, Ms. Apia McNulty, my 5th grade principal, Representative Dave Jacoby for strongly supporting this, and lastly, but definitely not least, Ms. Melliker for standing with me every step of the way. I'd also like to thank my parents for always encouraging me and always putting me on the right path. I'd also like to thank the people who took the time out of their busy schedule to read and sign the petition. Thank you to Superintendent Degner, who kindly took my message and spoke to the board on my behalf. He might as well be the reason why this will hopefully come true. Please think about these few reasons and more, why we should have a break for Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr. With all sincerity, thank you for listening to my voice.
Thank you, Reem, and you're welcome to continue on with the meeting as an attendee, like the other folks here. We do have another hand raised. Kim Amal.
Hello, my name is Amal Taib, and I'm a 7th grader at Southeast Junior High and a member of the No School on Eid campaign. I'm attending this meeting today to express my support for a new ICCSD calendar that can include the consideration of Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. Throughout our school district, we can notice the growing population of students, and your support of a calendar that includes our Eids demonstrates both support towards Islam and inclusive encouragement throughout the district. Alongside this, including both of our Eids and other religious minority holidays will open up to more opportunities for the ICCSD to present instruction and recognition around both Islam and many other religions. I believe that this would be a great step towards understanding and accepting other religions in our community, and that this would encourage inclusivity in our school district.
Thank you. To see if there's any more hands up. It looks like there are no more hands raised. So let's go ahead and move on. I thank all of our commenters. Oh, we got one hand raised right at the last second there, Kim. Go ahead and Yashasvi.
Hello, everybody. My name is Josie, and I'm here to express my support for the NSC campaign. I'm part of the Ideal Reality Union, and I feel like this would show that we are, that we support diversity and we are proud of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more thoughts? All right. We will move on. So the next item up is just our approval of our agenda. Sorry, I've got too many windows open on my computer. So is there a motion to approve?
I move that we approve the agenda for March 23rd, 2021.
Second.
All right, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open.
I'm an I vote. I'm having password issues again. Sorry.
Thank you, Director Clausen. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
So next up we have consent agenda. Are there any comments from directors after reviewing the bills that they'd like to share? Not seeing any. Are there any items that directors would like to pull from consent? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Sean, this is Charlie. I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second. Sorry, second.
All right, thank you. Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, thank you. And then I guess we move right on into our discussion item on around return to learn. And I'll pass that over to you, Matt.
Sure. Thanks, President Eystone. Good evening, everyone. If you noticed on the public facing portion of the agenda tonight, we did break out some return to learn topics, and for the community, we'll continue to do that as we move forward here, since we're not having a conversation about learning models per se. There's other topics that we still be important to cover throughout the following weeks and months here as we approach the conclusion of this school year, and then also look to next school year and what some of those components look like. So we'll continue to break those out. Tonight we have a topic around health and safety and vaccine update that Chase will take the lead on those. Amy will talk to you a little bit about teach and learning data and some of the fast results that we've seen from this last period. And then finally, we end with a short overview of the PK-12 online learning program. So with that, I'm going to turn it right over to the team, and I'll have Chase jump in here to take those first two.
Thanks, Matt. Good evening. Three topics on health and safety tonight. First, the CDC continues to update guidance, and guidance that came out last week involving schools suggested that social distancing could be cut down to 3 feet between individuals in the school setting. That doesn't really impact what we're doing in terms of health and safety. As we've brought more students back, we're continuing to social distance where we can. But in a lot of places, because of the number of students we have in classrooms, we were not able to obtain that 6 feet. In some spaces, although fewer, that 3 feet is even a challenge. Although it's nice to hear from the CDC that they believe that airborne spread is even more limited than they thought from 6 feet, as we continue to try to focus on the health and safety parameters in our building. The other two pieces are really related to our vaccine clinics, and happy news there. This Friday ends the round of second doses for our employees, and so after Friday, we will have vaccinated over 1,950 people through our partnership clinic with the UIHC, which is just fantastic news. While we were able to get through almost 2,000 people during the last 8 weeks, we had a number of individuals that we've hired this spring, or people that just decided later in the spring that they wanted the vaccine. And so we've been keeping a waiting list. And actually, we are going to have our waitlist clinic also this week for 66 additional individuals. So by the end of this week, we'll have actually vaccinated either second dose for the vast majority, and a small number of first dose, over 2,000 people that are employed in some capacity by the school district, which is just, we think, really fantastic news. And we're very excited about that, and can't say enough thank you and kudos to UIHC as well as Johnson County for their support as we've made the vaccine available to our staff. Along with that, several weeks ago, the CDC released guidance about quarantine protocols for individuals that have been vaccinated. So we sent information out to our staff this week that we are going to change our quarantine protocols for staff that have received both vaccines. Moving forward, as of today, staff that have received the vaccine, both doses, and it's 14 days post that second dose, because that's what the CDC says is the effective period is 14 days, and that wear a mask and that are asymptomatic, if they're exposed to COVID, they will no longer have to quarantine. We think that's great news for us. It will help us ensure that we continue to keep our teachers and other staff members in the buildings. Unfortunately, we can't make those same concessions for students as we go through the quarantine process, but we are excited that based on the vaccine and having so much of our staff through that, we are going to be able to eliminate that quarantine period for staff members that are asymptomatic and wearing a mask when exposed to a positive COVID case. So that's a brief update on health and safety this evening. I'm happy to take any questions on the health and safety side before turning it over to Amy. All right, Amy.
Thanks, Chase. Kim's going to share a presentation with us, with everyone tonight. So for our teaching and learning report, we actually have two components tonight. We're going to talk to you about our K-8 reading and math FAST data. We just got done with our winter universal screening period. And then Dr. Schultz is going to take us through some slides around the ICCSD online learning program and talk to you about the parent communication, actually that was sent out today, as well as some upcoming webinars and a little bit about mission and vision. So with that, I'll ask Diane to start sharing about the FAST data.
Sure, if you can advance the slide would be great. One more would be super. All right, so we are going to share the FAST data for elementary and junior high. We administer the FAST now K through 8th grade, and we do that 3 times a year, as you know, in the fall, in the winter, and in the spring. And we do have state results as well for FAST for elementary in reading for K6. So on the next slide, we will show you first our reading data for elementary. So our K1 students take the early reading test. Our 2 through 6 and actually 2 through 8 students will take the CBMR, so the curriculum-based measurement for reading test. So I've given you the data that we've collected. This is the percent proficient over the past few years in the winter. So I've given you 18, 19, and 2020 winter data. I've then given you the fall 2020 data and then the winter 2021 data. And as we shared in the fall, we saw a significant drop this fall from past data. We were at 64% compared to other falls when we were in the 70s. And then our winter data, we rebounded just 1 percentage point, which is really probably not even statistically significant. So we're very similar to holding steady here yet in the winter at 65% proficient, which is lower than we had been the past winters. So we know that COVID certainly has had an effect on the proficiency rate of our students. We're about 8 points down from where we typically have been in the winter. We are still above the state average, which is 63%. So the state has also seen a dip in proficiency scores for reading across the board as well. And again, we still see some of the biggest or the lowest scores there in our first grade, which is the lowest across the state as well. And you think about our first grade students who really had a challenging kindergarten end of kindergarten year and most of first grade year. So those are the students who are being impacted probably the greatest by the COVID situation. And then we also are sharing you the disaggregated data, which remains pretty steady from fall into winter as well. Then on the next slide, we have the math data. Again, our young kids, K1, take early math, and our 2 through 6, in fact, 2 through 8 take A math. So there our students pretty much held steady, 2 points, again, maybe not statistically significant, but we were 70% proficient in the fall, 68% in the winter. And past winters, we've been at 62, 65, 70%. So math has maybe not been impacted quite as much as the reading has been. But again, you see some of our low scores in first grade, and then a low score this winter that we had in 5th grade as well. And then our disaggregated data, as always, is showing us, discrepancies in our students of color. Our Black and Brown students are significantly discrepant from our white and Asian students with our percent proficient. And then the next slide shows you similar data for 7th and 8th grade. We hadn't been giving FAST in 7th and 8th grade until last year. So for reading, all 7th and 8th graders take A reading. We've gone from 72 to 73 last year. This year we're at 75, 75. The only caveat to that is we are testing a few less kids this year. We've struggled getting some of our online students to complete the assessment. So instead of testing 95, 96% of our kids in the past, we're testing about 85, 87% of our kids. So we are missing a group of kids who we just haven't been able to get to take the test. So our reading data is about at 75%. And then on the next slide for our math data for junior high, we do see a bit of a drop. We saw a bit of a drop last year from fall to winter, 72 to 68. This year we're seeing a drop 74 to 69. So pretty similar to numbers that we've seen in the past for our junior high students. So that's an overview of our FAST data. Any questions on that?
Diane, this is Charlie. The average numbers are actually very helpful and important, but they suggest that they may not be the best way we can utilize to identify individual students who have had a decrease in proficiency above the average decrease. So do we have the capacity data-wise to produce that kind of an analysis, to get an idea of how many actual students had a decrease in proficiency that is significant? So their teachers and parents would probably want them to be engaged in some kind of remediation or additional instructional program.
Well, just to kind of remind you, at the elementary, any student who is not proficient for 2 periods in a row has to be receiving an intervention. So we know that all of those kids are receiving an intervention in reading or in math if they have not been proficient for 2 periods in a row. So that's being taken care of. We do get reports from the state that show us 2 other pieces of data, which is kind of interesting. So we look at the percent of students who were proficient in the fall compared to those same students' proficiency rate in the winter. So one would hope that if you showed up to us in the fall being proficient, that by winter you would stay proficient, right? We've noticed this year that there's been a bit of a decrease in that we weren't able to maintain as high of proficiency from fall to winter. And we can look to the lost learning opportunities that maybe we've encountered throughout the fall and the winter with COVID. We also look at a score where we look at the kids who weren't proficient in the fall. how many of those actually became proficient by winter. So we're pulling that data as well, and we're having buildings kind of review that data. So if that's the kind of information you're looking for, we could share that information as well.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure that I'm convinced that the board members should be involved in reviewing that data. I think I see our responsibilities more as being convinced that the CSIP groups in each building are looking at it very carefully and acting on it. So if that's the case, then that's more of what I'm interested in.
We are. Yep. Those are called healthy indicators by the state. So the state does ask us to review each of those. So not only the percent of kids tested, the percent proficient, but then the change. So the kids who went from proficient to non-proficient, or the kids who went from non-proficient to proficient. So we're looking at the change in those as well.
There's also some other healthy indicators that we monitor. So for example, Diane was talking about the fact that we have all kids involved in an intervention once they have 2 testing periods in a row that they're non-proficient. Some of our buildings actually provide the intervention right away after they're non-proficient for one time. So when we add that intervention, even if we don't add it after the first time they're non-proficient, we're doing progress monitoring on those students. And so while our data that we typically bring to you at the board table would be the 3 times a year that we do this universal screening, all students that are non-proficient then become progress monitored once a week on a short passage, so that we're monitoring progress. And we won't change up the intervention per se a couple of weeks in, but if we get to 4 or 5, 6 data points or progress monitoring graph, or as we're graphing that each week, if we see that there's not progress being made, then we'll adjust the intervention somehow. Maybe it's days of the week, maybe it's the amount of time, maybe it's the actual curricular intervention itself. So one of the healthy indicators also helps us to understand what percent of the kids that are non-proficient are being progress monitored. So it's yet another way for us to kind of test the system to make sure that those students are being appropriately, educated or mediated.
Amy and Diane, can I ask a quick question? Can you cut this data by enrollment type, online versus standard enrollment?
That's been a struggle. I'll let Diane speak to that.
Yeah, that has been a struggle, Janet, and primarily because kids have switched so much this year. Kids have gone from, even our standard enrollment students have had periods of online enrollment because of school closures, or have switched between online to on-site. So it's been a real challenge to determine which kids are true one model or the other.
That makes sense to me. The reason I'm asking the question, we just opened up, we're talking to the community about the online program, right, for next year. And I feel like having some, sorry, my dogs are going crazy. I feel like having some kind of sense of the difference between online versus standard enrollment in terms of proficiency, and then also your thoughts in terms of those interventions you were just talking about. What works in an online version versus what works in a standard enrollment. Sorry, I'm going to go on mute.
Those are all great questions. And I do know Adam's team has been working on trying to tease that out. One thing that we need to take into consideration is, kids weren't randomly assigned on-site versus online. So there might have been a different starting point for our online students versus our on-site students. So maybe not always comparing apples to apples in that situation. But I know that we are looking at different ways that we can try to kind of capture that data and to know what's really making a difference. Education is just not always cut and dry.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I get it.
Yep.
Yeah, totally get it.
I was going to say some of our interventions lend themselves to having, been online, whether it's Lexia Core or Dreambox, if we're utilizing those for interventions. The other thing that we've had to do in some instances, of course, for copyright purposes, is get permission from the individual vendors that we can be using their materials in this online format. So at every turn we encounter a challenge, and but you're right. I mean, if we could disaggregate it both by intervention, by understand with the understanding of whether the child's been online or on-site, that would be tremendous.
Yeah, and maybe next year that's something that we can do more intentionally because it's not going to be disrupted, right? The choice of instruction model is not going to be disrupted by the quarantining and closures and things like that. And so maybe next year's an opportunity to start collecting some of that data in a little bit more intentional way without the unplanned disruptions, to start getting that baseline and sense of interventions and how the online program is working for students and that kind of thing. So it's a good place to start with that next year, I think.
Amy, this is, oh, I'm sorry, Sean, go ahead if you wanted to ask a question.
Well, it was kind of something when you were asking your question earlier, Charlie, it got me thinking, a lot of times, in past years, normal years, if you want to use the word normal anymore, we had the discussion of, looking at proficiency versus growth, right? And so I'm wondering this year, as we look at proficiency numbers, can we look at the magnitude of loss? Because if in past, if our percents of proficient students hasn't changed a huge amount, but they went from scores 50 and we were averaging like 45 before and they were not proficient, now they're averaging 20, that's a huge gap, right? But the percent of proficient maybe doesn't change a lot. So is that something we should be or are looking at? I know it's something we should be looking at, but are we kind of looking at that magnitude of difference?
Yeah, that's not something we've been intentional about pulling at this point. It's certainly something I can talk to Adam's team to see if they maybe could pull that information.
I do think that's a good point, Sean. And we have talked about that before, about how we start to look at measures of growth or lack of growth, I think is kind of where you were almost talking about with your question, right? Like if we had, maybe they weren't proficient, but then they also, lost a lot during that period of time. And now to get back to proficient, that hill is going to be harder to climb. And so I do think as we continue to talk about achievement data and some other reports that we bring you, we do need to look at what are those growth pieces, because the proficiency measure isn't a story, right? We also could have had a kid that grew tremendously but didn't potentially reach proficiency, but there's a story to tell there. And so I think connecting that to Charlie's question, the piece that would want to reassure people to is how individualized this is and how frequently it's looked at and progress monitored for each individual student. But when we bring you these summative reports, I think that's something we could work to do, is telling a better story around growth and where starting points are for kids and how they're growing, or where we maybe have some opportunities where there's a lack of growth. Because I think that honestly, that slide that showed the kindergarten and the first grade, right? I mean, that's going to be a story to watch over the next 2 to 3 years too, for that first grade group and how they continue to progress through our system and the rate that they grow as we go through these multiple transitions. So
I will say,
that's one we'll come back with.
Sorry, Matt. I will say at the individual student level, they are looking at that. So each student that is being progress monitored, they have a graph, and teachers can see, is that graph going down? Is it maintaining steady? Is it, increasing at a rate that we would expect? So whether that's data that we're pulling in the aggregate level at the district, I do know that individually kids are being looked at to see, are they making progress? What's their trend line showing?
One thing I felt a little bit guilty about, I just spoke earlier, our kiddos in K6 are progress monitored on a weekly basis for reading, and that's per the K3 ELI legislation. We just extended at K6, that same rule. In math, we do progress monitor every other week. Adam, sorry, I think you were going to jump in.
Yeah, no problem. I was just going to share one of the things that we jumped on right away this year with my team, with Austin Wells and Michelle Croft in our data and research analysis group, is developing really a research agenda surrounding COVID-related learning loss and also the effectiveness of our program delivery as we look at some of the specifics in terms of what kids have been exposed to, what's looking like it's working. And it really speaks to a lot of the questions that have been posed today. And I wonder if it might be useful for us to bring that back as a more comprehensive update about where we're at and where we're trying to get to with some of that work.
I think that would be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, I would certainly welcome that, Adam, too. I just want to ask Amy a follow-up question. I think, Amy, you indicated that some buildings are actually using students that test non-proficient look at them every year. Some buildings will do it every 2 years. Is it, should we be going towards a system where buildings look at the students every year as opposed to every 2 years?
Yeah, so actually what I was talking about is each universal screening period. So think fall, winter, and spring. So with the ELI legislation, that's now, gosh, 5-6 years old, there was a requirement in the K-3 language that it stated that when a student was non-proficient over 2 testing periods, so the fall and winter, that's when you had to go in and prescribe an intervention. So we follow that true to the test, right? What I'm saying is sometimes if a student hits that right away, you know, the first benchmarking period in the fall, our buildings will go in and add that intervention right away and not wait for 2 testing periods. So we are standardized in our expectation according to the law. Some of the buildings, or in some situations, we start that a little bit early. Regardless, even if you don't add the intervention after students are non-proficient that very first time, those students have to be progress monitored on a weekly basis. And so it's not like we're not paying attention to them at all. And, you know, that was just how it was written. You know, one thing we struggled with when we first saw that language come out is much of the research or recommendations around progress monitoring students suggested doing it every other week. But of course, we're going to be compliant with the legislation and the law. And that's why we extended the rules to be similar for reading K-6. Does that help,
Thanks.
Charlie?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
You guys want to go ahead
All
to
right.
the online
Yep.
part there, Amy?
Yep. I'll let Greg talk through these next slides. Dr. Schultz.
All right. Yeah, Kim, if you just want to back up one slide. Oh, no, I guess my slide's not there. It was the cover slide that had our, go one more, I think. There we go. Thank you. All right. Development for the online program, just a little brief history, began well before the pandemic. This work was headed by Adam Kurth, of course, but it was put on hold due to budget constraints. This did, of course, give us a bit of a head start. We 2-3 years ago, this was developed because we recognized then, even before the pandemic, that some students could really benefit from online learning. Some students really struggle with various aspects of in-person school. Some students need greater flexibility with online learning, such as medically compromised students and students who are engaged in other life activities that conflict with traditional school schedules. And some students just do better when not surrounded by peers and are not able to concentrate much more on academic work. Of course, due to the pandemic, you guys were meeting weekly. We were all pressed into action to build out the online learning program, and currently still over 5,000 students, just about over 35% of our whole student body are fully online students at this time. Teachers were paid to adapt our curriculum for online learning, and 2 advisory groups were made to assist with the building out of the program for the 21-22 school year. These groups recognized that the strength in our online program was the teacher-developed curriculum and teacher-led classes. And for this reason, we came up with this tagline, real teachers, real classmates, virtual learning. And because that was what was unique about Iowa City online program, and certainly set us apart from the other all asynchronous options that were offered by other districts. I will say when we started this, we were the 7th online approved district. Now there are 18 in the state of Iowa that have been approved. So it's a very much a growing market. So what I want to talk to you very briefly today is just about the version 2.0 of the online learning program. That's what we're going to roll out for the 21-22 school year. So now if you go to the next slide, thank you, Kim. The name of the school is ICCSD Online. Of course, you're welcome to change that name if you ever want to do something a little more clever, or perhaps honor our previous equity director, Marion Coleman, perhaps. But if it is the 28th or 29th school in our school district, It is governed by you all, and it serves students in primary or pre-K to 12, and it is open to any school-age resident in the state of Iowa. All the teachers in the school are our employees. We are not contracting out for any service or any educational services otherwise. The curriculum covers the exact same learning goals as taught in all other ICCSD schools, and although the classroom activities will vary because we're doing virtually, the course content is the same. So the groups that met over the fall as we prepared to get approval did want to match up the mission of the online program with the district mission. And so to that, we just took the same mission that the district has and just added for students who need a flexible learning environment. Along with that, we looked at our vision statement for the curriculum, the students, and the teachers. And I won't read these to you, but to really define where we thought the value of our program would lie. So what we came up with was a program that looks quite a bit like we offer now, with some key changes at each level, the secondary, junior high, and elementary levels. And these, what we will be rolling out next week via 3 seminars are, the basic online program for K6, 7, 8, and then 9 through 12. In brief, we are looking at synchronous learning that happens via Zoom from about 8 in the morning till around noon. Instead of 2 subjects, it'll cover, 2 primary subjects. We focus on math and language arts right now, and we do synchronous science and social studies. Rather, we're going to do, or asynchronous, as I should have said. We're now going to do synchronous language arts and math, and then another period which will be divided between health, writing, social studies, and science. That's for K6. For 7 and 8, we will be offering those classes also in the same 8:30 to 12:30 time frame. This will allow for greater supports for students who need those greater level supports. What we have found is that the online learning program, some students are made for it and they can take it and run with it. Other students are good at it, but they need high levels of supports. And now for the first time, teachers have time to provide those higher level supports. And they can do this because they're not meeting 5 times a week, but rather they're meeting 3 times a week. And so they have time to meet with students who really struggle. At the high school, it gets a little more complicated. The analogy that I have people, that I use when I have people think about it, is the Kirkwood Academy. Students in the Kirkwood Academy will take classes in the morning or in the afternoon, and then they'll go to their on-site school. Students in the online program can either be fully online, or they could be online in the morning and then go to their on-site class in the afternoon, or they could be on-site in the morning and then do online in the afternoon. So that's a greater flexibility. We do know that one strength of our district is our ability to support higher level learning and very rigorous classes. To that end, we are going to try to run a pretty full AP program at the high school level, and that will serve a couple purposes. Of course, we want to serve our students in our existing schools. So if a class, for example, is too small to meet at one of our high schools, we wouldn't staff it because only 8 students were interested. This will give us the opportunity to offer that to students through the online program and not do it at a really inefficient or a cost ineffective way. So and then there are also programs that we're not able to run, or we just can't staff at all 3 schools. And this way students can take those classes without greatly inconveniencing their schedule like they would if they had to drive over to City High or West High, as we had to do back in the day. So that's the purposes that we see. What we have done is we've sent out an email today to all parents. We posted this on the website. That parents will be given the opportunity to sign up for the online, for ICCSD online for next year. We do need to get some advance notice of that. I know we were able to do some radical scheduling in August, but that was not the best way to plan for schooling. So we would like to be a little more organized about that. So we sent out a notice today that on April 5th, all parents will get an email within a way to indicate that they would like their son or daughter to be involved in the online program next year. And then we will ask that they return that to us by April 12th. And at that point, we'll able to rough in this a staffing plan. We will do like we've opened up other buildings. We'll make it internal openings first. And then if we're not able to fill them, then we'll go external. And we believe that we'll be able to post those certainly by mid-April. We'll at least have the first round of openings available for teachers to see. Along with that, we are having 3 opportunities for parents to get to know more about this through 3 webinars. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week. We'll run them at night so they're accessible. And you know, elementary, junior high, and high school, and we'll be there to answer questions and also just give a general overview of the program. But we do know that this is a malleable situation, as all things have been with pandemic, and so there will be opportunities for parents to, what I always say, take another bite at the apple later on in the summer. But we will be having to shut that off in order to staff the program successfully. And I think the timetable for that really hasn't been determined, but right now, the best indication we have is that a childhood vaccine won't be available to the end of this year or early 2022. For that reason, we've also are able to offer parents the option of being in the online program until such time as a vaccine has been distributed. And then they can get out of the online program at the next marking period. So that will allow, again, you know, a rational and logical way for us to staff the changes in on-site enrollment. So with that, I'll thank you for your attention and answer any questions that you have, and let Amy correct any things that I have misspoken about. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schultz. You did a great job. I would say that we do intend to open that second enrollment period in June with the hopes to have it closed right around July 1, so that if we need to make further staffing adjustments, we have time and opportunity to do that. So kind of 2 windows that will be open, but going out with the first push here next week with the webinars, and then officially with enrollment forms opening on the 5th.
May I ask a quick question, Greg? Thank you for that. It's exciting to really see this online program come to fruition this way. And I apologize if I missed it around, and I'm thinking specifically around secondary, high school, and the course catalog. And so you talked about some of the flexibility of, you know, smaller class sizes, being able to offer a section online, but not do a physical. How will parents know what classes are available in the online program? I mean, I'm just, and I apologize if I missed that in the discussion.
Well, we have, you know, we will be able to, in most cases, be responsive to the requests that we have. So currently, we have what we think are all the core classes covered. So they're listed online. And we have then set aside some AP classes and higher level classes that we also anticipate will be sought after for this. But once we see the So our students have already told us what classes they want. Now they're just telling us how they want to take them. Do they want to take them online or in person? Now, we will have to go back to some of those students and say, hey, you want it fully online, but you also wanted ceramics. And that's not one we're not going to offer. And so you'll have to change it if, you have to make that, or you'll have to become a part-time online and part-time on-site student. So what we can, right now, we can tell them that here's our best guess of the classes that we're going to offer, all the core classes and some extras that we anticipate. Then we'll be responsive to the needs as they indicate, as they indicated in their class requests as we build out the schedule for online learning.
Okay, that's great. And that's helpful.
Greg,
it just feels like this might help us overcome issues we've had in the past, right? Of not having high enough enrollment in certain classes for a physical section to be offered in a high school. This might give us the opportunity in online to allow that section to move forward, right? Even if it's a small number of students.
Right, and that's going to be one of the benefits, but it'll also be one of the challenges because we may come to students who say, hey, look, I signed up for fully on-site. I'm a City High student. I want to do all my classes at City High. But we find out that we're going to have to go to them and say, you know what, we need to take one of these classes through the online program. It's just how it will be offered. But the principal's been great. They've all committed that they'll have space in their buildings for students to take those classes, and that they'll support the students to take them in the online version when that has to happen. So there'll be some growing pains, but please know that, I think that extracurriculars always come up in this discussion, and co-curriculars, that students who are in the online program can be fully engaged in. They can be in the football team and they can be in the online program. They can be in the academic decathlon or the math club or speech and debate. They can do all those things and be involved. I will say one thing that's been a challenge is performing music. We are not having performing music option for the online program. Students who want to be involved in these ensembles, they will have to be part-time and have to physically go to be involved in the ensemble work. They can do lessons through the online program, but they can't be involved in an ensemble experience without being in the building.
Thank you. I
was just going to add that. Sorry, Janet, I keep speaking over you. I was just going to add that in our online program publication, and you may have said this, and if you did, I'm sorry I missed it, but all the junior high and secondary high school courses that we intend to offer, at least up front, are sitting in that publication. Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, so Amy, this is Charlie. I have two major things to talk about maybe. One is the per pupil cost of this new school, basically. It may be too soon to figure that out because we haven't done it over a sufficient period of time to get some kind of a cost basis. But have we thought about that? I think one of the options here is that any student in the state of Iowa can enroll in a ICCSD online program. Did I misunderstand that? And if not, then can you at least give me some kind of an outline about what kind of cost this new way of doing school might be to the district and how we might meet that cost?
Yeah, those are great questions, Charlie. So just think of open enrollment into any district across the state of Iowa, same thing. Open enrollment applies here too. So a student in Storm Lake, Iowa, theoretically could sign up for our online program, and it's all through open enrollment paperwork. So remember that deadline is March 1st. And during the last board meeting, we approved about roughly 30 families that had signed up for their students to come into our online program. And then as far as cost, you asked, that's a great question. I think when I think about total cost, what we tried to apply, and I think we did a great job this year, is to remain budget neutral. And we were able to take advantage of, and Greg was speaking to that a little bit, of really probably staffing our classes at a more optimal level, I would guess. And I'd have Matt jump in and Greg and others to say if this isn't the case. But at the secondary level, where maybe you have some low class participation, we were able to work that around the edges. And so I feel like our staffing was fairly efficient. We knew this summer we had conversations at length that we needed to stay budget neutral on that, and we were able to do that. I think what's going to be interesting to see how this plays out is how much staffing efficiency can we still get? Will we be able to do that with our numbers online? You know, at the elementary level right now, where it's a clear break, if you're a classroom teacher online, that is your day. And your day looks curricular minute wise fairly similar, not exactly similar to what a teacher on site looks like. However, they have roughly around the same amount of students, right? We talk about that all the time, that we staffed the elementary online at RAM 5 levels. The thing that I would say with that is if what other costs would you typically associate with a building, right? It'd be your counselor, your secretary, your principal. Well, because our students were still technically attached back to their buildings this year, we didn't incur those extra costs. And Greg's position was helping. That would be the one thing outside of our typical cost. So I think after we get into this program for a year and we really run it as a true school, we'll be able to maybe cost that out a little bit better. But our goal is that it stays, you know, budget neutral.
Okay, thanks. Those are good good things to start thinking about as we go into this. And again, I really commend the staff for developing this new way of doing schooling in the district. I do think it's very interesting and could be potentially very helpful for teaching and learning. Of course, the other issue in my mind, have we thought through some of the potential equity issues as students start to choose online or on-site or some combination of things?
Yeah, can you ask more about that, Charlie? And so as equity of access, is it equity or access to interventions? What are you thinking about?
Well, do we anticipate that our disparities in academic achievement will change? Will it affect our discipline disparities? And are we creating opportunities, barriers, or do we not know yet for students of color in the district?
Sure, I think it's a little all of that, Charlie, to be honest. And so I think, you know, Greg did a nice job of talking about when this work began and then how this work picked up and continued this year. And if you remember, one of our core principles around return to learn and all that planning was, of course, an equity focus and an equity layer. And so as we developed courses, as teachers, whether they were in the online program or on-site teachers this year, received professional development, all of that professional learning still happens with all of our staff and still committed to those same efforts. And so whether it's the creation and production of curriculum and instruction techniques, or trying to get better as a staff and learn more effective ways of reaching and teaching our students, to what you're talking about around equitable access, potentially with access to internet and hardware to access the program. I feel like those are things that we've worked on as a district and set goals around. And so, of course, the online program is going to be influenced around this. Interestingly enough, you asked about discipline rates, and I think obviously we've had kids back in school. We've had more activity around you know, students' behavior and some of those things, and not that we were absent of that in the online program, but I do think it could have some potential impacts for us that way. And also trying to, I know Greg's worked hard on this too, about if it's the right fit for a family to do these things. That some, as we've proceeded through an online experience with some families that tried it and then decided they needed to be on site. I think those are going to be same conversations that we'll entertain next year and have to do, that a family may choose on site and say, hey, this has happened in our family, and when could we potentially get into the online program? And those are all dates and markers we'll have to check out, or vice versa, that they start in the online program and it's not a great experience, even if we've tried to provide support and some of those things about when could they access their traditional on-site experience. And so I think you'd see a lot of those same approaches we would try to take in our buildings applied to the online experience. And it's not for everybody, but it is for some. You know, it has been an effective vehicle for some. And I think it's a good opportunity to continue the lessons we've learned, you know, through this experience this year and improve upon those. So I hope that helps a little bit, Charlie. I don't know if I answered it directly, and I think some of them probably are still unknowns and that we'll have to continue to work through.
No, it is helpful. And to me, I think right now I don't see direct answers for us. Do we know anything about what the research indicates? What kind of online learning works for students of all students, or is that too fuzzy right now?
I think Greg could probably talk to you a little bit about some of the work I know he's done with his teacher teams throughout the year about effective things that they've tried to do to continually engage students in best instructional practices. I don't know how deep you want to get into that conversation, but I'd say we are familiar with what some of the research shares and shows on that. And then again, trying to account for this year being unique, right? That some people probably wouldn't have chosen an online experience absent of COVID, but moving forward, these would be people and families that be selecting into an online experience because they think it's best for their students. So Greg, any takeaways you'd want to share from work with teacher teams around, a few best practice things you guys have talked through?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, when we looked at how other programs are structured, is that most of them are structured around asynchronous learning. So that, they literally say, we have a teacher available. So the teacher ratio for some of the programs, the two that started were about 1 to 43 or 1 to 44. So that would not be what our, say, elementary classes look like at all, because they're doing it all asynchronously. So you're one of those 44 kids, you have access to that teacher when you need them. What we identified is that our strength was the creating a classroom environment and having a teacher-led instructional unit rather than a asynchronously led instructional unit. But certain students, we still have a number of students in our district who are opting to go with the fully asynchronous model. And I think they probably are doing that because they want the total flexibility. What we recognize is that we're not ready at this time to really compete with that fully asynchronous model. It takes a long time to develop those kind of units, but we were able to right now compete very well for students who needed the interaction and the relationship with a live teacher and live classmates. So I guess what I will say is that I think we ended up adopting a method that is more inclusive than the asynchronous method, which we found to be less inclusive. You really have to be a certain type of student to be able to have the initiative to go out and learn on your own, like those programs are designed to do.
Great, thanks.
I have a question about, how we might support kids from like a mental health and social emotional standpoint. Will they have access to guidance counselors or student family advocates and that sort of thing if they would have, in a typical in-person school setting?
Yeah, we did set that up all through K-8. And so you will find a social emotional piece that's built in 4 times a week, which is more than we do it now for on-site in 7th and 8th, and ongoing through the counseling, but also through the morning meeting in elementary. So we feel like we really cover our bases with social emotional learning for that. I think the high school is one where we will have to do some work on exactly where that lies. But we are, we're planning on staffing an advisory that is more like the same as on-site, whereas for K-8, we did more than they're doing on-site because we recognize that. We may have to then go back and look and see if are we doing enough for the online high school student.
And Greg, what about like if a kid is, so rather than a regular sort of social emotional lesson, what if they're just really struggling and they need to talk, like they would now, they'd want to check in with their guidance counselor, they need to talk to the SFA just because they're having a bad day. What about that kind of support?
Yeah, well, I don't want to get too out in front of the staffing here, but I know my recommendation is that I certainly have a counselor associated with the building, and that will be determined later, I guess. So Matt, yeah, if you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what JP, what Amy was speaking to a little bit about earlier is once we determine what the enrollment actually looks like for the online school or online program, we'll better know how we can staff those. Of course, we'll create access points for student and family advocate and guidance counselor. I think it's just too early to tell, will there be one that is just for the online program, or will we still associate them with their homeschool for access to that? And so we know those are needs and we know those are supports and just access points that the kids will need and families will need. It's just hard to know right now how we'll arrange that until we know how many students enroll into the program.
The other thing I would add is just similarly, you know, depending on our student makeup, we'll have special education teachers available, ELL teachers available. And and they could be exclusive to the online program like Matt was sharing, or maybe they're, you know, part-time online program and part-time in a building. So it's really going to be dependent on enrollment.
I have one quick question. Will our students in the online program be able to access nutritional services, whether it be paying full price for lunch or free reduced lunch, or would that be something we would have to determine once we know the enrollment for the program?
We think that they will be able to, Rathina. When we thought that when we came back in the fall, that the waiver wasn't going to get extended for free lunches, we started to put a plan in place that would allow students in the online program to access lunch services. And so Alice and her team have already been working on that. Of course, when we get enrollment numbers, we'll have to refine that and figure out, you know, how many different options will be available when in terms of where they can pick them up. But yes, we believe that we can accommodate student lunches for individuals in the online program.
So Sean, I think that's the end of our return to learn portion, unless people had more questions about any of those components.
Well, I had something that didn't really fit in any of the components, so I was kind of waiting until we got done to ask it. You know, we've received a few, you know, emails about folks wanting to switch between one platform or the other, and we covered that quite a bit at our last meeting, so I don't want to get into that. But we did have one person talk about for the students that are currently online, you know, what kind of opportunities will they have for some of these end of the year activities, things that you know, they may be missing out on if they're not physically there? Will they have some access to some of those? And maybe we don't even know what our end of the year activities look like quite yet. I know we're still discussing things like graduations and proms and stuff like that, but can anybody speak to that a little bit, even if it's under discussion?
Sure. It's been a topic weekly for us. And so I'll let Nick jump in here kind of with today's update. We had a meeting with our secondary team today about some of those end of the year activities. And I appreciate your asks there, Sean, relative to the online students and their participation in those too. So I'll let Nick start in that and then see if we have any follow-ups after that.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sean. And I think, you know, like anything, the online students are currently connected to their high school. So those opportunities would be there for them. And we're working through, we actually worked on some details today regarding the musical performances that we talked about at the last board meeting, making some progress there with following some of the same guidelines we do for other extracurricular activities in regards to attendance and different things. And then prom is another thing that we are working through some of the details there, but there is no reason why our students that are online wouldn't be able to be a part of that. We've talked about people, we are going to limit our prom type event to students that attend that particular school. So we don't have some of the outside visitors or people coming from different schools and different things. Those are some of the things we're working through. And then also graduation, we've kind of been thinking about two pieces with that. One, our online students would be able to attend their graduation for their high school, but also we need to be thinking about people who aren't comfortable with that and wanting to make sure that students who are do not want to come on site for a graduation would have an opportunity to be kind of recognized as well during that performance. So I think in all those situations, we'll have those opportunities. And those have been some of the bigger ones that we're working through because we know how important those are at the end of a high school career for our students.
what about just some of the stuff that, in each individual school does kind of at the end of the year in their own building during the school day? They might have, and they're probably completely changing how they're doing it, right? You're not going to have an all school party in the gym or anything like that. But those types of things, I think was kind of what the question that we received was about, something in that vein. And I don't know if that's been part of the conversation or not.
Nick, do you want me to jump in?
Go ahead, that's fine.
So I think at all levels, Sean, we've continued to talk to the principals about maintaining our health and safety protocols and continue to do as many of those large group interactions virtually as possible. And so our principals have been really great about thinking creatively of how they can do some of those things while maintaining social distance. So moving them outside or keeping small groups and cohorts and doing them virtually. We know that some of these pieces, graduation, prom, and some of those end of the high school experience are ones that can't be repeated. And so we've looked at them and said, okay, we're going to take these out and we're going to exclude these from some of the health and safety protocols, understanding that we can't social distance. And so working with the principals about how do we put as many health and safety pieces around it, but understanding we're never going to be able to fit that that square peg into the round hole of the health and safety guidance. But for everything else, we really tried to work with the principals and saying, look, we're going to limit this number of exceptions to a very, very few events, but try to think creatively about how some of those other end of the year celebrations can take place, but focused on virtual or doing shifts in ways to maintain those cohorts in small groups.
Thanks.
So, I've chaperoned prom. What's a COVID prom look like? I'm curious.
I think we're working through some of those details, JP, because yep, a traditional prom probably doesn't. And as you heard from Chase there, I mean, we're going to have to, I mean, if you're choosing to attend prom, I think there's going to be some understandings that some of the health and safety protocols are not going to be able to be in place. We'll have some that we'll be able to maintain as best we can. But also, I think the high schools have been doing a really nice job of having some creative options of having some aspects of it potentially being outside, as well as looking at some different things. Weather permitting, hopefully that'll be the case. But one of the things that that is a real concern in this is, it's not an event that we would be able to contact trace. So there could be some implications after that. So we'll have to do a good job with communicating some of the potential implications and some of the things that can be in place and some that aren't, and allow families to make a decision in regards to, prom as best they can. So
we're going to give chaperones like a meter stick, walk around and.
I'm picturing a giant spacesuit that looks like a tuxedo.
Maybe just those big bubbles, that you can run into one another with. We'll just put all the kids in those. They'll be fine.
All right. Is there any other return to learn type questions that directors have? All right, let's go ahead and move on to our next item then, which is an equity update. Matt?
Yeah, so good evening again, everybody. Thank you. This is our monthly equity update around the 5 action steps we've committed to early in the school year or late this summer. I'm going to take the first 2 and then ask Amy and her team to take the next 3. The first one about hiring of the ombudsperson. You guys know we've hired Taj Solomon, the equity director from Dubuque, to come be our district ombudsperson. Taj is slated to start for us virtually. He's having some issues transitioning, I guess, from Dubuque to us, and some family concerns that he's working through, but he did want me to let you guys know that he's excited to get started and looking forward to that time here. And so we had anticipated he'd be on board with us in March, but it's looking like it's going to be an April 1st start. And so Taj will be taking on that work. And if you remember, that work kind of stemmed from the idea of people, when they had concerns, feeling like that they were listened to and that there was somebody advocating for the process, that those concerns were handled effectively and heard and channeled to the right folks, that they could be successfully navigated. So we're excited to welcome Taj. to the district here in just about a week. The other item that I've taken is around the evaluation standard for teachers and leaders, and additionally support staff as we work through this process. And so we've started to gather materials and communications with the Iowa State Education Association, School Board Association, School Administrators of Iowa, some of our professional organizations, trying to look for resources, and then honestly other state models about how they've included culturally responsive teaching and leading into their evaluative framework. And so right now we've been gathering that. We're working on forming a group of folks that will meet to kind of take on this work and give some reflective input into what we would bring forward for a standard with criteria. The Iowa teaching standards are based off of 8 standards and 42 criteria. The Iowa leadership standards there's 6 of those standards, and the leadership standards will also be transitioning here in the next year for the state of Iowa for our evaluators and our leaders. And so we'll also give a close look to what those new standards do include to see what additional may need to be included on the administrator end of it. But that work is ongoing. And again, we hope to have a product here, or will have a product to you before the end of the year or early summer here that we'll look at starting to use into next school year. So that's where we're at with those 2 items. The other 3 items center around curriculum and professional development, and our PBIS and Rethinking Discipline group that's looking at our discipline protocols and procedures. So with that, I'll have Amy give a brief overview of those 3, or team members give a brief overview of those 3 items, and then we'd be happy to take questions.
Thanks, Matt. Hello again, everyone. Well, I would say I'm going to start with the PBIS and Rethinking School Discipline Work Group. It's hard to synthesize now our work because we are 9 of 10 meetings in. So next Monday night, we'll have our final official meeting. But just for the board's awareness and audience members, we are going to keep that group intact and use them as a sounding board and a group that could give us feedback along the way, because we certainly know the heavy lifting that we've done over the last several months with the work group and documents that we're pulling together, and a publication that we want to have in front of the work group next Monday is certainly not the end all be all. And I guess I would just start with back to the why. You know, the why is around our disproportionality. This work also links nicely back to our diversity, equity, inclusion plan. We need to reduce the disproportionality. We know what our ODR data looks like, office referral data, our suspension data, our climate and culture data. You know, we've got disproportionality, particularly with our students of color. So we aim to change that. So as we've been working through, you know, at the very beginning, we had some presentations around PBIS, the actual discipline protocols and procedures manual. Some information was shared around culturally responsive teaching and restorative practices. And then we spent the first several meetings really just in the month of December invested in hearing from various stakeholder groups, conducting a couple of listening sessions, sending out a stakeholder survey, and then the work group got to see that feedback as well. And those were, you know, put in some into some broad buckets or broad themes. Our most recent work then has involved getting into some of the DPP documents. We didn't touch the documents that were related to administrative guidelines or board policies because we know that you'll be reviewing those or have been reviewing those. There's data entry documents as part of the DPP, suspension procedures, bullying, harassment. None of that was looked at. What the work group looked at was really those behavior infractions that a team of a group of stakeholders about 7 years ago looked at. Not all of the behavior infractions or at that time were stated to be suspension worthy. The DE has roughly 31 behavior infractions. And this particular portion of the DPP spelled out the more serious behavior infractions and the potential of suspension. And so the group has looked at all 9 areas, and some of the language has been tweaked. We know it doesn't go far enough, but we know that lies in the work ahead. And so next, that's a component that's been worked on with the work group. They've had an ability to go into the documents at a couple different times and offer feedback there. And then the other thing that's happened is around social, emotional, behavioral, mental health supports. So when we're talking about the reactive side with the DPP, but we know where the opportunity lies or where we can make the most impact is on the proactive side. And so what we've done is really build out a framework that describes our MTSS process for social, emotional, behavioral health in the district. and try to do it in a way that's digestible to an audience member that's reading it off the website, because ultimately that's where we want this publication to land. So next week, as we build out this larger publication, it's going to have an introduction, and paired with that is going to be a series of next steps. And so you can see also there's mention of the work that we were largely involved in this past school year, both in the work group and then just outside the work group in our normal department work. Laura Gray's work, Laura Daly's department, and Kate Callahan's department there. So introduction and next steps, then we're going to have this social emotional behavioral health framework built out, and hopefully, again, language that's digestible to an audience member that's reading it, at the website, a parent, a community member. From there, then we have a document that'll help transition that talks about, if we find ourselves in an unfortunate circumstance where some behaviors have occurred, here's what the DE defines as the problem behavior. Here's the potential actions taken. There's a lot of actions that could be taken, from a conference with a student to dealing with the misbehavior in your own classroom, all the way up to suspension and expulsion. And I would just remind the group that we haven't expelled anyone in Iowa City schools for at least 10 years. And I don't know how much longer that it could have been past that. I just know that roughly that data is accurate. And so after that document, we'll also talk about, how the continual response that we would want to see from our staff, so that not every behavior necessarily has to become an office referral, right, or a student sent to the office. That's kind of our transition document. Then we'll feed back into those 9 areas that the work group looked at, those 9 behavior infractions that stakeholder group 6, 7, 8 years ago looked at for suspension. Again, we've tweaked some language. There's more work to do. And then we're going to end that document with those board policies, data entry, suspension procedures. I think critical in all of this is, that series of next steps. A couple of key components will be to implement our MTSS system with fidelity. And when we talk about social emotional behavioral health, a lot of that is the PBIS framework, but it spells out exactly our expectations for what that work looks like and what our supports look like for students, both for everybody at the tier 1 level, and then for students that need that extra support at tier 2 or tier 3. The bridge in all of this, and I know that this is where we're headed as a district, is bringing in more restorative practices and restorative justice. And we've talked to you just briefly about, that concept, and we do have restorative practices happening, but not in a standardized way. And we haven't brought a standardized approach to professional development in that arena. And ultimately what we're after is trying to transform school climate and culture. And then we think we'll reap the dividends, with our data having improvement. That's the hope, and that's the end goal. Laura, or Kate, would you add anything to what I've shared there?
I would just say to go further with the RJ plans for our district. I plan to send out an invite to we do have an RJ team. So we have a team of teachers and community members that do circles and do the training that our staff takes. And so the plan is to reach out to them to start to get some regular meetings on the board around which way to go first in regards to rolling out something systemically in regards to RJ. So we're not there yet, but that will be happening before the school year is out.
I think you're muted still, Aim.
Sorry, thank you, Laura. I'm going to hand it over to Brady to give our social studies update, and then we'll go back to Laura Gray for professional development.
Thanks, Amy. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see all of you. The social studies self-study team that's meeting as a part of the curriculum review process has its 3rd meeting next week, and they will be looking at a draft of a plan of action that is built off of the identified strengths and weaknesses of the social studies program that they identified based on data analysis as they work together in their breakout rooms and then large groups in our first two meetings. And I would say running parallel to that, we're looking, Diane and Laura have been fantastic in helping look at some options for our elementary social studies curricular materials that we could implement next school year. We know that that's a priority for the district and a need. And we've been able to use members of Laura's trained some folks to work in the cultural proficiency team. There's a subcommittee that acts sort of as equity specialists and does curriculum review, some curriculum review for us. And they've been able to help us with that. We're hoping to get a team of teachers that would pilot. We've got a product that we think might have some potential that we're looking to get a team of teachers to pilot at the elementary level to see if we can get some feedback on about that. So those are the two things sort of running, side by side. I would say to the board, I think, the importance of the comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion plan is well worth noting. And, strategy, I think it's 3C within that plan, talks about having a more inclusive and representative curriculum. And it's really, there's a lot of power in having a comprehensive document like that, because it provides a really clear set of values for the district and a really clear rationale for the work that we do. So if you wonder, how does that plan get utilized? I know Amy talked about it with the process that she's using. We're certainly utilizing it. We met with other curriculum coordinators this afternoon. Diane ran a really nice meeting where we talked about how it should be and could be used with other curricular areas as well. So just know that the work that you've done in creating those documents, the work the district has done, it is important. It does, it does branch out into some other areas that I think, you're going to see results of that are positive results for the district. So that's where we're at. We're, we'll see how the third meeting goes. It might be our last meeting for the self-study team. Potentially, we'll see how it goes. Certainly that wouldn't mean the end of our work. That would just, mean the next step in terms of some of the actual, work identified in the plan of action would start.
So I can jump in. And I just one correction, Brady said that I trained that group, and I didn't. Like, that is just a really talented group of cultural proficiency team teachers who I just kind of pulled them together, but they just kind of do their thing, and we have a common understanding about how to look at and assess and give feedback. But so just one correction, I don't want anyone to think I was down there training them, because I wasn't. But thank you for that. So we have some professional development opportunities in regards to equity. The entire year, we started off with cultural proficiency and are heading towards culturally responsive teaching. We're not fully there yet. Our admin team got that type of training, and some of our coaches, but our teachers haven't yet. So where we are now is really around intersectionality. That's tomorrow's equity PD, is around intersectionality. And we have our very own Lucky Kiche from Kirkwood that's going to share some information and help us out with that. And then we have 2 more mandatory equity professional developments coming up. And those are going to lead into components of culturally responsive teaching. We also have some book studies coming up with the principles around culturally responsive teaching and also restorative practices. So that's really what we have planned for the rest of the school year.
Thank you, Brady and Laura. Questions from the group?
This is Charlie. Brady, this question is actually, I'm thinking about your team. So I assume you're going to give some kind of a report or summation to the board, indicating what you've done, how the curriculum will change. So my request is, unless the other board members think this is stupid and we're not going to do it, can you just tell me, as a 6th grade student, say, what will I see different in my studies in one day, one lesson, as opposed after you're done, as to what I would have seen before? That really, I'm just trying to think, how could I learn about what you've done? And how could I understand that?
Yep. No, it's a good question. Thanks, Charlie. I will do a full report after the self-study team is done with their work about what it is that they were, what they accomplished, the direction that they see the district needing to go in, and the action plan, of course. I think, I guess one of my hopes is that sixth grade student that you mentioned is going to see a classroom that over time becomes more of an inquiry-based model classroom, where we're helping students to really develop and fine-tune their ability to ask questions and to engage in metacognition and to see issues from multiple perspectives, and to start to orient our social studies classrooms a little bit more that way. It'll be an alignment, better alignment, I think, with the Iowa Core and better alignment with the National Council for Social Studies. So I'm hoping that that's what that sixth grade student would see on that day, is that they are provided with a rich and vast array of primary and secondary source materials. They're more in control of their learning. They're learning how to ask questions and then follow up on those. And they see the teachers less as the disseminators of facts and knowledge, and more as facilitators of an exploration and an inquiry into really important, interesting questions in social studies. So I don't know that if that makes sense. That's my, if I got to say whatever classroom.
Well, yeah, it makes sense somewhat to me.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a feel for what makes sense to a sixth grade student.
Yeah. Well, I think that they'll see, the tasks that they would be asked to do would be maybe slightly different than the tasks that they would be asked to do now. It's easier for me to give you a perspective of a high school classroom. So I'm studying the media in my own classroom. I'll use just a personal experience. And, there's a lot of discussion, of course. It's an important discussion about whether or not the media is biased, and where that bias might be, and what different sources do, and the effect that it has on people's political behaviors. So rather than me, I know what the research is, but rather than me just providing the research and some of the frameworks or the answers that scholars have, we're doing an experiment. It's called One Story, Four Sources, where the students are in charge of really trying to investigate a single story told on the same day from 4 different media outlets. So they have to figure out how to ask the appropriate questions, create an experiment to determine whether there are some differences that they can sort out and what the impact of those might be. So I'm hoping that in that time, that our students are going to see themselves more in control of their learning, and so I don't know how profound that will be. K through 8 is prescribed in terms of the topics that you have to cover by the state of Iowa. So, there's not going to be topical differences just because the state standards say in 5th grade, this is what you teach, and 6th grade, this is what you teach. But I'm hoping that how we help students understand social studies changes a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Brady.
Thanks, Charlie.
All right, any other questions or comments? I kind of want to go back to school right now. That sounds fun. All right. With any other items on the equity update? I kind of lost track of how many things we were going to talk about.
No, we did get through all 5 of them, Sean.
All right.
So Sean,
go ahead, Charlie.
Just one more thing. We approved tonight several personnel changes, and I just want to comment that if I can, that I supported those changes. I think that I've talked with Matt about them. I think that the process that the central office staff, Matt's team, went through in arriving at those recommendations included a lot of diverse opinions on the part of the people that were making those decisions. And I fully support the process that they developed to come to that point. I think we're still devoted to increasing diversity and leadership in buildings, as well as leadership in the central in the ESC. And I look forward to the changes that are coming up in the next few weeks along that line.
Thank you, Charlie. There's no more further comments on the equity update. I think we can move on to our next discussion item, which is the calendar for the next school year. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, guys. This is one that we've talked about a couple different times, and just want to give a shout out to Reem, who spoke to us during community comment, and of course our other students that supported it as well. But what you have in front of you tonight for conversation, we're not doing a public hearing or asking for a vote. It's just simply a discussion item to make sure we're relatively on the same page with the direction here. Is a calendar that includes two different dates where it would be no school and no work. And we would still need to work through some of the work details with all of our different work groups before we would be able to specify out all of the details in that. But key first would be no school and no work for teachers. As we look at it, it's really a true day off, one in the fall and one in the spring, that would speak to the importance of other cultures in our district. And so as you heard the community commenter talk about one of them, that's obviously the day we're talking about in the spring. And then we also have a day in the fall that speaks to another large sector of our community that would be important for them to recognize as well. So with those 2 days, then we would move 2 days to the end of the school year to capture those back. And with that, that bumps graduation to Memorial Day weekend. We're trying to move graduations eventually off Memorial Day weekend. But to make this calendar work for next year, we would make that trade and then look at preceding year's calendars to see if there was something innovative we could do to get that graduation moved off of Memorial Day again. This did go to the district calendar committee. I think there was good support from our teachers and leaders on that committee for this change. And so I feel like this is also an important equity step for us to recognize different segments of our community and how our calendars have traditionally been built, and some minor changes we can make that would have a potential big impact and speak to different cultures in our community. So with that, I would take any questions, or if you're confused about which 2 dates I'm speaking about, I could point those out, but I think it's relatively self-explanatory there. And I guess the next step, maybe I'll say this before I pause for questions again, would be if there are no questions or concerns, then we would bring this back in a public hearing format and then ask you to vote on an approved calendar for the next school year. So tonight's really just discussion to make sure we're on the same page.
Matt, moving forward, are we, as a calendar committee, do we need to vote or make a policy that the calendar committee just considers this as they're doing their 3-year calendars out every year?
Yeah, I think that'll just be part of our ongoing work, JP, that we won't bring you a calendar without those dates included. And so as that calendar committee continues their work for the preceding year's calendars, we'll always factor in those 2 days. If for some reason there'd be a shift away from that, I think we would have to have a conversation. But I think just as far as how we hold some other things kind of pretty consistent in there, whether it's winter break or spring break, some of those things are codified in agreements where these aren't necessarily. But I know that's my commitment, is that these 2 days are going to be continued in those conversations, and that we'll always bring calendars forward moving forward that have these 2 days in there.
And it's in the fall, is that when we usually get the next kind of 3-year calendar vote?
Yeah, I think typically we've done those at the organizational meetings where we've tried to put those set of the next 3 years calendars in front of you. So that's where I was saying, then we'll look at those following 3 years after this, Sean, and see if there are some other smart changes we would make. Right now, we try not to touch a lot of different parts of the calendar to make this change. But there may be some other changes, knowing that we're going to incorporate these 2 days moving forward that we would consider. But this year, it seemed as the easiest thing to do for next school year is put these 2 days in and then move 2 days to the end of the school year and have the trade-off with graduation.
And directors, you'll see when we get to agenda setting that the agenda for the next board meeting on, which I think it's April 13th, has on there the public hearing and then the vote for the calendar for next year. And then we can, as Matt said, work on the calendars for future years in the normal process. This is kind of a one-time deal.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments on that? I guess I give you a spoiler. I'm for it. So.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, I do appreciate you meeting with not only our students, but as well as people within our community to make sure that we were recognizing the dates that they felt better recognize their community. So thank you to you and your team for doing that work. And I just want to say I had an interesting conversation with someone at work today that brought up the direction that we could potentially be headed in and adding these 2 dates. They raised the issue of, well, when will it end? We will just keep adding dates. We're not honoring every single holiday, not even from the Christian perspective. Yes, we get winter break off, which everybody knows always centers around Christmas. It's not incorporating every single holiday, but I think it's important that we continue to do this work as we know that our populations continues to change. So with that being, the work will never stop. I mean, potentially, we can see us taking a look and maybe figuring out that we overlooked a group and we want to make sure they feel inclusive. So I don't think the work will ever change or stop. So I do appreciate us being a district being willing to continue that work and recognize that we need to make our calendar as inclusive as possible for our students, families, and our staff as well.
And Matt, I just want to support too, or give a voice my support for the staff in your work in bringing this about. I suspect it's been an intensive process on your part, so I really appreciate your undertaking this.
Thanks, guys. I do think it's one of those. Sorry, Janet, go ahead.
No, I was just say here, and thanks to all the students, families, parents, community members who've been advocating for some time and continuing to come and express their views. So I want to thank them as well and thank the calendar committee and Matt, you and your team. So thank you. Support it as well.
All right, so I will look forward to at our next board meeting having the public hearing and the vote on it. With that, I think we should go ahead and move on to our action items. The first action item is the PEPL life cycle budget. I don't know, is Les gonna take that or?
Yeah, Les is gonna take the lead on the next 2 items here, Sean, so we'll let him jump into the PEPL life cycle budget.
Good evening, board members. The first item is the PEPL life cycle budget. If you recall from prior years, this is a process that we have developed. It's probably about 7 or 8 years ago where we looked at our facility needs in terms of smaller projects, a bathroom remodel, some of those type of things that don't fit into the facility master plan. They're much smaller in nature. It's painting, electrical needs, new equipment for the maintenance of our grounds, and snow blowers and trucks for the physical plant are all part of that. There's a instructional piece for music equipment that's in here as well. And so we've reviewed all of those needs that the physical plant has, and they've identified as priorities over the next 12 months to address in our buildings. Some of those projects are carryover from last year that got moved down the line a little bit, and some are things that got moved up to work on. And so we have the specific lines for each one of those areas so that we can track those that you can see on the budget. But it's a collaborative process with our physical plant team in reviewing the needs for all of our facilities across the district.
All right, are there any questions from directors? All right, if I would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the PEPL life cycle budget for FY 21 and 22.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All right, Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, so our next action item is on the superintendent recommendation for FY 2022 budget, and I'll pass it right back to you again, Les.
Thank you again. Again, this was a collaborative effort with primarily with Chase and Matt to work through what the needs are of the budget process. And so this is a culmination of that process. You have several documents that were attachments to the agenda tonight. Part of the reason for those documents is to provide you a couple of ways to look at how the budget is put together at the big scale. As if you recall, when we started in January, the certified budget process only sets the property tax rate, and the maximum budget authority for the year does not determine the line item budgets that we'll spend those in terms of staff and the other areas. And so that's what you have in front of you tonight, is a couple ways to look at that, both just kind of in a numerical chart as well as in a graph format. We all absorb this information differently. And so we're just trying to give you a couple different ways to look at that to help your understanding. There's also a PowerPoint that's about 18 slides long, and I'm not going to go through those slides in great detail. I would just like to highlight just a couple things in that slide deck for you to take a look at if you haven't already. The first 6 slides are just a recap of some of the enrollment numbers that we've shared with you before. Slide 7 really shows how the impact of a district with increasing enrollment and the new money that comes into their budget versus our most current year, where our enrollment dropped by about 286 students. So you can see the impact there on that slide as you move forward. Then we have several slides that show the tax consequences and some trends in the tax rate compared to some of the other urban ed districts with similar size. Screen 12 is an important slide because it shows what the voters control, which would be the voter approved PEPAL levy that we discussed a little bit in relationship to the facility master plan, and then the GO bond debt service. And that's what the voters are able to approve. And then there's a portion of the budget that the board approves in terms of approving the dropout prevention program, approving cash reserve levies that support the SBRC actions that have been brought to you over the fall and earlier this year. And so all of those things flow into that in terms of the board action. And then there's about 50% of the budget that is just set by flat out by the formula that's driven by the state of Iowa. And so, we don't even have control over that portion of the tax rate. Then on the screen 13 and 14, provide a little bit of information what the impact of our proposed tax rate will be on our taxpayers. And using a $250,000 valuation house, the increase would be about $51 for next year. Almost all of that increase is due to the rollback, which is another state determined formula on how much of the valuation is subject to the tax rate. Since that valuation or that rollback percentage went down for fiscal year 22, it means a little bit more of the value of your house is subject to the tax rate. And that's not only our tax rate, but that's the city and the county tax rates, as well as the community college that has a small tax levy as well. And so that breaks that out for the residential taxpayer. It also shows a commercial taxpayer and the impact there, and then multi-residential, which is a pretty prominent tax-paying entity in our community with the university here. And they actually have a rollback factor that will decrease their taxes next year. Not only for us, and like I said, the city and the county rates as well. And then we'll just finish it up with a couple graphs. What does all of this come to? It comes to a proposed tax levy rate of $14.85 per thousand. That is slightly over 1 cent higher than the rate for fiscal year 21, the year that we're currently in. So essentially it's a flat rate. This will be the rate that will be published. And when you approve that rate on April 13th, that will be the highest that the rate can go for our taxpayers. There is always some legislative action that happens at the end of the session. Those of you that monitor that are aware of some of those things and how the budget all comes together, and they have to look at all of the districts across the state. And so there could actually be a slight change to that tax rate in the final. And what we normally see is it goes down 3 or 4 cents. So it's likely that our final tax rate that we come to in June, even though you would approve the 1485, maybe several cents lower than that, which obviously is a benefit to all of us as taxpayers. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions you might have. The one thing I might add is that we have factored in relatively small amounts for the ESSER funding that is provided for the federal government. And the reason why we haven't put the full impact in here is because we have the next 2 fiscal years to spend those funds, and any funds that come in would be a matching dollar amount on the revenue side and on the expenditure side. So they're essentially neutral to the overall budget. And since we're just setting the tax rate in this process, that will come at a later point when we go through that process. And we'll actually have to probably amend our budget next year, which we do on an annual basis anyway, to reflect all of those more accurately as we expend those funds over the next 2 fiscal years.
All right, thank you, Les. Any questions by directors on this?
I don't have any questions. I just always want to say how much I appreciate the work that's done. I know this isn't maybe considered the exciting stuff, but the fact is it's great when it's not exciting, that we're not having to worry about problems and oversights and errors. Les, you and your team do a great job to give us really good numbers. So I appreciate that. And frankly, I'm really happy in this discussion, you know, we're not having a discussion like we did a couple years ago about serious cuts and what that has to look like. So it's nice to have a nice boring budget talk.
We do have to thank the federal government for that, for the funding that is coming our way to public schools across the state and the country, that will soften the blow of the impact to staffing and programs for schools. You know, as it's an enrollment driven formula in Iowa. And so it, you know, in October, I wasn't nearly as happy about this budget as I am today, and having those funds, and we're going to work hard to provide programs that support our students across the district. So.
Agreed. I appreciate all the hard work as well. I would echo that. Charlie, do you have something to ask?
Well, yeah, thanks, Sean. Les, just kind of generally, there's a couple of places in the budget documentation that talks about changes in enrollment. One has to do with the difference between enrollment out and enrollment in, and the other one is, of course, the enrollment decrease that we've seen this year. So I think in my simplified way of looking at life, it would seem to me that changes in enrollment don't really have much budget implications, because if enrollment decreases, or if we have more students leaving, enrolling out than enrolling in the district, that means that we have less cost for educating the students that remain. And I know that is not in reality that's not the reality that districts have to deal with. So could you just briefly explain why looking at an enrollment change does not necessarily mean that because your enrollment is going down, that doesn't have any impact upon your ability to provide the programming that you want in the district?
Thank you, Charlie. That's an interesting observation. And part of that, in response to your question, is due to the magnitude of any increases, either up or down. In the past 20 years, we have seen a steady growth in our enrollment, and years of over 400 student growth to years of 20 or 30 students. 20 or 30 students over our 27 buildings is about 1 student per building. So it's pretty hard to identify that and the impact that that would have. When you put 400 new students into our system, that essentially is the equivalent of an elementary building that we have to serve those kids in some way, which means we're adding classes. You know, space considerations have been an issue for us. And then we have temporary buildings spread out across our campuses. And so when adding those staff, it does have budget implications. In the current year, in the drop in the budget or in the certified enrollment by the 286 students, you know, each one of those students carries a little over $7,000 of funding with it. And so it does require us to take a look at our budget and how we staff things. We're still going to have all 27 buildings open this year and next year, no matter what those students are. It's how those students are arranged in those buildings that provides us the challenge and the use of the temporary buildings that we may need to have in some locations where the enrollment is a real hot spot for us. But those 286 students will bring our budget down and has created the budget guarantee for this year, so that we do have that same growth of 1% that's in the legislature. So if the decrease was 25 students in a 14,000 student population, you wouldn't see much change in the budget. But when it becomes you know, about 2% change in our budget, it does start to impact the way we look at it. And that's where my comments just a few minutes ago about the federal stimulus dollars that will come in and allow us to do some of those things. One of the primary things that we did is the nurses that were added to serve our students in this last fall that the board approved are going to be funded with those ESSER dollars. And then as our enrollment is expected to increase back to the previous trends, it will catch up to those expenditures as we move through those years, as well as the normal cycle of our teaching staff and other support staff that cycles out of our total employee base.
Yeah, Charlie, I think an easy way to look at it too is, so if you had 300 students you were losing, and if you roughly figured out 30 students per teacher, that would be 10 less teachers that we would have to cut essentially at the end of a year like that to say, and then we would still have the threshold of trying to maintain our current programming, right? So the districts that get into a declining enrollment cycle, it becomes really difficult because our list of things to do is not getting any shorter. And we're still going to continue to try to offer that same breadth of program, but you're doing it with fewer dollars coming in because the formula is driven on that student allocation. And then our money is tied up into people, right? We're a people business and we pay our staff. And so the only way really legitimately to cut costs is to cut people. And then you're still trying to continue to offer the breadth of a program to do that. So that's where the challenge starts to compound itself. And so where it's not just as easy as, you know, you may see it on the surface about decreasing cost, because then you're really removing people from jobs or not being able to have as many people in your organization to carry out that mission and that good work moving forward.
Okay, thanks to both of you for trying to make me understand this. So,
as JP said, it's exciting stuff, Charlie.
It is at that, JP.
I was just going to give my perspective on it. You know, if a district was going to lose 30 students, it is as simple as Charlie says. If those 30 students are all in the same grade and all at the same school, right? Because then that's a teacher you can pluck out of there because you don't need that teacher anymore. But the reality is that those 30 students are, you know, one at 30 different schools, and you're losing the same amount of funding, but not able to do any corrections staff wise. And so we talk about efficiencies at our buildings, right? At different sizes, there's kind of some tipping points that make things more efficient. I think that comes into play as the whole system as well, right? There's some tipping points as the size of the district jumps by large numbers. I think we're going to gain or lose efficiencies that way as well. So it does complicate things for sure. With that, are there any more questions for Les on this item? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the superintendent recommendation for FY 2022 budget.
Second.
All right, any further comments? All right, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, thank you, Kim. Next up is our agenda setting. And so there's a few meetings on there. So next Tuesday, we are going to have a special meeting that is just the public hearing on the bids for Trek, and then an action to go with that. And following that, we will also have a short closed session. So some quick things that the timing was sort of needed for both of those to get it in there. And then on the 6th is our next operations committee meeting. And what's not on there is the day after that is our next P&G meeting, our policy and governance meeting. Director Malone worked hard on getting that onto the calendar. So I appreciate that. But then our regular board meeting, this is the nice thing about having 5 Tuesdays in March, is that it is 3 weeks away for a regular board meeting. It does have all of the regular things on there, but you also see, as we mentioned earlier, the public hearing and the action item on next year's calendar, as well as our standing operations committee update after they've had their meeting the week before. I wanted to know, we talked about it, and I don't know if it's able to get on there to have the portrait of a graduate update is kind of where we're at. Just on a discussion item there. I can't remember if all the meetings will be done. I know there's one tomorrow, so the next one will be done, but I can't remember if there's another one after that and when that happens, but an update would be great for that. Are there
we
any?
can do an update on the second one, Sean, is we'll have the second one completed by that. Yep.
Perfect. Directors, are there any other asks for the 13th or beyond? All right, sounds like we're good. I know that's several weeks of meetings, but hopefully next week will be fairly short. And it's good to get the committees back up and running as well. So that is our last agenda item. So before we adjourn, is there anything else for the good of the cause? All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn then.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, folks. Good night.
Thank you all. Have a good night.